Welcome to the next installment of Max Minutes. My name is Karen Leon Denis. I am the Vice President of Community and Economic Development at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And for a long time, I've been working on workforce development issues and particularly working to help make sure that Max is the amazing resource that it has been for the Atlanta community. So I'm excited to be here today to kick this off and to talk about that intersection between economic development and workforce development. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from Grant and from Gregg today. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment and say thanks to our anchors. Max would not be possible without the support of all of these organizations, as well as members all across the metro area. So I just want to say thank you as a board member and really excited to be able to work with you. And so I'm going to turn it over to my fellow board member, Daniela Perry, to get us started. Daniela?
Thanks so much, Karen. We really appreciate everyone joining us this morning. I think it's going to be a great discussion with Gregg and Grant. So without further ado, we'll kind of turn it over to them. Gregg Simon serves as the Senior Vice President of Project and Partner Development, and Grant Wainscott serves as the Vice President of Ecosystem Expansion. So Gregg, we'll kick it over to you to hear about some exciting announcements in the metro Atlanta area and what we should all be mindful of.
Great, Daniela. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks for having me and Grant on today. So just to kind of give my perspective, I serve as Senior Vice President of Project Management and Partner Development at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. And the majority of the work that I do is working with businesses, number one, trying to get in front of businesses all over the world to promote Metro Atlanta as a place for them to locate an operation. And then once we have a business that is interested and is actively evaluating Metro Atlanta, I work with them along with our partners, because everything that we do is very much a close partnership with the Georgia Department of Economic Development and Georgia Power, and all of our local partners at the county and the city level, and the universities play a big role in that as well. Personally, I would say the majority of projects that I work on are office-related projects. As an organization, we work with industrial projects, whether it's distribution or manufacturing. We work on data center projects, corporate headquarters, research and development, call centers, shared services facilities, branch offices. So we see a wide range of skills required. Obviously, this past year has been crazy for everyone and very abnormal, I would say. In a typical year, we have a lot of international companies also. Foreign direct investment is a really big part of what we see. And in an average year, I would say almost 50% of the businesses that we're working with are based outside of the United States, which, from a labor standpoint, creates some interesting dynamics and challenges and opportunities as well. In terms of what we've been seeing lately and recent announcements, I would say that international pipeline has kind of really almost died. I hate to use that word, but in 2020, we had very few international announcements. I would assume that's all COVID related, but the announcements that we did have, and we had some great announcements, I would say, Microsoft being the number one by far, most exciting, dynamic, great announcement that we had. We kind of started out in 2020 in May. They announced that they were putting 1,500 jobs at an Azure Cloud Computing Center at Atlantic Station. And then this year in early 2021, they confirmed that they also acquired 90 acres of land at Quarry Yards on the west side to further build that out, in addition to a data center in Douglas County and one in South Fulton County as well. In addition to Microsoft, we had Papa John's announce that they're relocating their headquarters from Louisville, Kentucky to Cobb County. We had Deluxe, which is a fintech company, announce a major office in Sandy Springs with 800 employees. We had Zillow and Dunwoody announce a 200-person expansion of their offices there. So that's a lot of activity on the office side. We had a lot of activity on the industrial side as well. Henry County was particularly active with manufacturing. A couple of mattress companies, mattress manufacturers, Zinus and Purple. Douglas County, I think Breezy is on. Good morning, Breezy. I know Bang Energy announced a 600-person sports drink manufacturing facility there. I think this food processing has been a really big segment of the economy that's been expanding lately. I know DeKalb County had Sugar Bowl Bakery, which I think was about 400 jobs. And then Fulton County had a waffle manufacturer, frozen waffles, frozen pancakes over at Fulton Industrial. So food processing has been really big. I won't get into the industries too much. I wanted to just kind of quickly mention some of the big announcements. And then I want to turn it over to my colleague, Grant Wainscott, who will get more in depth about the industries. And so Grant, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Greg. Morning, everybody. Appreciate you involving us today. Greg's team is responsible for managing all these major projects as they come through, and there's a lot of work that has to be done in the lead up, and a lot of you on this call are part of that when we do employer interviews or when we do site visits. Companies are looking to get a real feel for the region, and sometimes that can take years before a project like Microsoft or Airbnb we just heard from before they actually announce. There's a lot of aftercare though that's required once a company decides they actually locate here. And the team that I lead at the chamber, there's three of us in that lead the economic development department here, and I lead a team of cluster experts that it's our job to do the really deep dives into the ecosystems that frankly grow GDP in Georgia. So team members that I work with go into all the industries that Greg was mentioning. It's transportation and logistics, it's med tech, healthcare, health IT, fintech, cybersecurity, all the creative and digital world, smart cities, and so much more. So it's our job to really understand, who are the employers, who are the companies that you all are working with. How do we connect them with the education system, whether it's K-12 or higher education, and make sure that they're not just getting the staff, the team members that they need, but that we're preparing for whatever these clusters really have in store for us. As perfect example is the lead up of esports and gaming, and I think we saw something coming, several years ago, probably 5 years ago, with the dramatic change in gaming being more mainstream as a career. I mean, not just being a professional game player, but being a caster, being a game dev, animator, scoring music. So being able to react to those types of shifts in the market, that's really what my team is principally engaged in, and trying to understand who's here, who's not, what conferences can we go after, and bring them here to really highlight the ecosystem. How do we get our leaders on stage to be seen as thought leaders around the world? We work on rankings, making sure that if somebody in Singapore is talking about fintech, that Atlanta's in the mix, right? It's London, it's New York, it's Atlanta. And so we work hand in hand with Greg and John Woodward, our colleague that handles all of our inbound and outbound investment internationally, to really, and again, I'll use Microsoft as a great example. When a company has that kind of a runway and is here for a number of reasons, diverse talent, cost of doing business, a market that you want to be in, right? That people from all over the world, that are Microsoft team members would want to be here. That's a lot of work goes into telling that story. So when we work with a company, and workforce is the first question, it's the middle question, it's the last question. Incentives are great, but as Greg and all the other economic developers on the call know, incentives make a good deal great. They don't make a bad deal good. So you really have to, you lead with the access to the 60 colleges and universities, with almost 300,000 students just in the metro area, let alone the draw that we have from all 7 southeastern states. And I think when companies really see that pool of talent, At that point, it's a matter of, okay, well, how do we be meaningful in what we want to accomplish here? So a lot of the projects that I work on, personally, aside from our team, are the creative digital media. It's film, gaming, animation, music. We're working on the Grammy Museum. I'm sure you've seen announcements for that. Working on growing, our film studios as Pinewood transitioned to Trilith, as Aussie Aru, Open Aru Studios. You've seen the expansion, and looks like the land swap deal is going to go through, hopefully, with Blackhall. Helping those studios really manage the needs that they have as they grow. So the workforce needs for the creative industry are a completely, I don't want to say different skill set, but something that the state has on, we're in hyper mode, trying to provide access to that. So, we've seen the growth of the Georgia FinTech Academy, through the state and the USG system, pivoting and being able to open an esports and gaming academy component, with that launch to really, work with CMII, work with SCAD, work with, all of our colleges and universities to find the type of programs that will be able to train, the workers of tomorrow for that particular industry. And it's been, I will say, the nimbleness of this, the university system, the schools, the university presidents all working together. I've never seen that in any other market that I've worked in. And I've worked all over the world, and this is such a unique environment. We have a lot of work still to do, of course, but I think companies see that, they react to it, and I think that's one of the reasons that we're so successful, because everybody on this call, you get one of us, you get all of us, and that's not something you find in these other major metro markets. So we're grateful for all the work that you do, and keeping all the economic development community engaged.
And Grant, I'd like to jump in also and follow up on something that you mentioned, that the importance when we're working with site location consultants for economic developers like us, that's our most important audience. They're very influential. They are, there's this niche industry within real estate or accounting that we refer to as site location consultants. And they work at firms like JLL and Cushman and CBRE, Deloitte, KPMG. There's a lot of boutique firms like Site Selection Group in Dallas, BLS Strategies in Princeton, New Jersey. And those consultants work for their clients to perform a number of tasks. Grant mentioned incentives negotiation, and that's certainly important and a big part of it, so that they can reduce the cost for their client wherever they go. Real estate, of course, is a big part of the role that they play, whether it's identifying a land site or an existing building. But as Grant said, labor availability is the number one issue by far. It outweighs real estate, it outweighs incentives. For the most part, you can find land or a building anywhere. You can negotiate incentives anywhere. But if that location doesn't have people with the proper skills, you're going to get cut from being considered before you even knew you were being considered. And so, for example, CBRE has a whole division. They call it their labor analytics division. They're based in Phoenix, and it's a team of about 20 people. And they reach out to us regularly. And they never ask about real estate. They never ask about incentives. All they care about is workforce. And what they ask of us is, can you set up employer interviews with existing companies in your region to give testimonials about recruiting talent? Can you set up meetings with not only the universities, but the technical college system of Georgia, which plays a vital role to understand the pipeline of talent, and to talk to human resource recruiters. We rely on those firms quite a bit for good information about what they're seeing in the market. So we spend a considerable amount of time working with site location consultants just to sort of understand and validate the labor pool that we have here. And it's a really interesting exercise and a challenging exercise to not only get them the data, but to make them feel comfortable with it, and that they're getting really useful, true, valuable, current information, so that if they do invest $100 million in a facility, they're going to be able to hire the people that they need. Transportation plays a big part in that. If they're going to come to Metro Atlanta, where should they locate to have the best chance of success recruiting talent that they need? And I would say for, industrial jobs in particular, distribution, manufacturing, is there public transportation to get our employees to the facility? We often have conversations with employers about that. So I just wanted to stress how important labor workforce is. And then tying into that, I have a lot of conversations with communities across Metro Atlanta along the notion that we've been really successful getting distribution to our community. It's been great. However, our community doesn't really want to incentivize that anymore. Those jobs are good, but we really want to get manufacturing jobs because the manufacturing jobs pay more than the distribution jobs. So, all right, that's a great thought and a great strategy, but if you want that, do you have the workforce to be able to support it? I can tell you, we've seen a significant uptick in the last 6 months of manufacturing projects, whether it's food manufacturing, as I mentioned, or consumer products, which are a lot of electronic related products and other consumer products, life sciences. We've had more biopharmaceutical manufacturing inquiries in the last 6 months than we've probably had in the last 6 years. So when I think about the talent needed for those, the skilled trades, machinists, tool and die makers, CNC operators, pipe fitters, welders, we often say, well, hey, we've got this awesome technical college system. They can create training programs. It works great. And we have quick start, so we can quickly get people trained. And the response lately has been, that's really good, but we really need people with 10 or 20 years of experience. And, we could come to Georgia, but we're looking at North Carolina. We're looking at South Carolina. We're looking at Ohio. We're looking at, the Detroit area. We're looking at New York. Some of those areas, the weather is bad, taxes are high, but they do have a lot of skilled, experienced manufacturing labor there. So I wanted to throw that out there also. And Grant, I can turn it back to you.
Well, it's hard to follow a discussion about how unhospitable the Northeast is for jobs, but it does show that beautiful weather and awesome people aren't always enough. And I think that I would say the same is true for all the industries that that my team works with and at the chamber works with. It is like I said, it's every discussion. Now you have to like dive deeper into that, because there is, it's the chicken or the egg question. If a community wants manufacturing to come, but they don't have the job pool right now, the skills, how do they get that, right? How do you bring a community up to 5, 10, 20 year experienced workers? And that was something that we faced on the South Side quite a bit. A lot of distribution jobs and some good manufacturing jobs as well. But getting the local community to be trained for jobs that may not even be there quite yet, that's hard. That sometimes it's a hard sell. Our elected officials want answers right now. They want to know, why did that company go to a neighboring community? We could do that. And I think that the job shed area, how far people are willing to commute and how you pull from a region instead of just within 5 miles or so, can be a critical factor. Greg mentioned transportation. That was a huge issue for us on the South Side, not having a bus system, or not being tied into heavy rail that could get people to and from particular office parks or developments. And so when MARTA came back, Clayton County passed the referendum and MARTA came back in, we saw a significant uptick in requests for not only companies to be considered for routes, major employment centers, but also companies that were looking in the area to know where those routes were going to be, so that they could plan, for potential locations. So, incredibly critical. But then you take someplace like, like Trilith, formerly Pinewood, where there is no, bus infrastructure that goes there. And they've proven that if you have enough of a draw, that can be enough, right? Pinewood is not, or Trilith is not an employment center as the actual land owners, right? It's kind of like a convention center. Most people don't work for the convention center. Most people work for the conventions that come in, so a movie studio may only have 10, 20, 30 actual full-time employees that manage, the property, but it's the hundreds and hundreds, if not, thousands of people attached to the film and the projects that are coming in and out of a community that really brings a lot of the employment. And then when you find, companies, lighting, sound, grip, all the key components, the Home Depots, everybody that wants to be on a studio lot of that size, then you're adding, onto that employment, but they don't actually work for the studio itself. So it's been fascinating to see, and I spend most of my days in the creative industry or fintech. Those are really the two big buckets that I manage personally. And Greg mentioned our fintech. The fintech growth. Deluxe was a huge win for us. It was a return of a leader who was important to us in this ecosystem for a long time. But we saw Cabbage get acquired by Amex. We've seen our next unicorns come through the fintech ecosystem, and those homegrown companies that are in some cases quietly raising money, quietly growing, and it may be 50, 100, 150 jobs here or there. They're not always the big sexy headlines. And sometimes they're the companies that ask for the least, but frankly need the most kind of support from the region. We try to identify those, and those are the companies that need the help right now. And so, knowing everybody that's on this call, knowing the assets that you have and the connections to the pipeline and particularly the education pipeline is critical for us, so that when we talk with a company, we talk with a CEO or CHRO, and they're having a tough time competing for quant talent, because we know the Microsofts, the Googles, all of the big tech companies, they're dipping into our market and tapping some of the best and brightest engineering and digital talent that we have. But can you blame a 22, 23-year-old graduating senior here for not wanting to go to Seattle or New York or London and have the career of their dreams? And that has to be okay, right? That's not a bad thing that they bring that experience. When we go in market to Seattle, to London, to New York, wherever we are, a lot of times we're connecting with those graduates that we know have come into a career. And we're always saying, hey, when you're ready, Georgia wants you back, right? Take that experience you learned 10 years in another market, come back here, and now you can really be that senior lead. Because there's a lot of ways for us to bring talent back home. And that's where, the university alumni associations come into play. That's where, fraternities and sororities or other types of business groups, we love getting in front of those, in another city and talking about what's going on in the region. An alumni association for Clayton State, if we're in LA, you'd be amazed at what who's living in that community. And they oftentimes are like, we've been talking about trying to move back my spouse or my partner. I really love my kids to take advantage of Hope Scholarship or whatever it is. That's a great pool. So, we look under every rock that we can to not just grow talent here, but try to, bring talent in as well.
I know we want to make this interactive. I see a few questions have come in, and we definitely want to get to those. I'll defer Daniela to you if you want to come on and start to moderate some of the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. It's been fascinating listening to you and Grant, so appreciate it. I wanted to first kick off, I know y'all both have talked about Microsoft and, the huge deal that it is in terms of job and investment. I was wondering if y'all could kind of talk a little bit more about how this really can open Georgia up, like having a huge announcement like this, like how does that impact the state for, expansions, but then also recruitments of other companies that might be kind of that Microsoft size and stature, if that makes sense.
Sure, I can jump in, and Grant's heard me say this before to our team. In the 14 years that I've been in economic development in Atlanta, and in the 26 years that I've been in economic development period, Microsoft's announcement to me is probably the biggest announcement that I've ever been associated with or seen in the Atlanta area. It's not to take anything away from the other great announcements that we've had in Atlanta over the years, but this is a huge announcement for so many reasons. Grant leads our efforts at the chamber to increase our tech sector in Atlanta. And we've been working on this for a long time and working with all of our partners. I mean, to me, the decision 20 years ago by President Clough at Georgia Tech to build Tech Square, I mean, that, sort of started to lay the foundation for increasing our tech business sector. And then we started to see small investments like AT&T opening up a foundry and Panasonic Automotive Systems of America opening up an innovation center at Tech Square with 25 people. Then we start to see bigger investments like Honeywell opening up an 800-person software development center in Midtown. And then we see BlackRock announce a 1,000-person innovation hub in Atlanta over by Ponce City Market, and NCR build their global headquarters. And, we've seen this increase in the amount of our tech sector growth. This Microsoft announcement, what they've said publicly is 1,500 jobs over at Atlantic Yards. And now with the 90 acres, Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, when he made the announcement, he wouldn't quote a specific job number, but he said we have about 25,000 employees in Redmond. We have about 7,000 employees in San Francisco, and Atlanta will be somewhere in between those. This will be one of our largest hubs on the planet. So it will be very significant. Other companies are absolutely paying attention to this. We've had lots of trips over the years, Grant and me with our partners to San Francisco, specifically knocking on the doors of tech companies there. And there's been more and more interest. We've read articles about the business climate in California is difficult. We've seen Oracle relocate their headquarters to Texas, Digital Realty Trust go to Texas, HPE move their headquarters to Texas. At the same time, we have Google significantly expanding in Midtown. Grant mentioned Airbnb's announcement a week or two ago of their East Coast hub in Atlanta. So I only see that accelerating, and talent, and I would even add on to that, diverse talent by far is the number one issue. Microsoft specifically cited that in terms of their global workforce, 5% is Black. And the number one priority is to increase that percentage. And so when you look at Microsoft's announcement and their announcement of partnering with the city of Atlanta on Accelerate Atlanta to work with residents of the Grove Park community around Quarry Yards to upskill the residents of the neighborhood, to give them technology skills, that'll be huge for the area.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, too, what we've been hearing about is tech talent and just the significant importance that it plays in really having that diverse pool. We hear the same thing from our membership. We've got some great questions in the chat and wanted to just, how has remote working kind of impacted relocation, expansion? What are y'all hearing from people? Maybe transportation is not the barrier that it was. What are y'all kind of getting feedback in terms of recruitment and then in existing businesses here?
Yeah, I definitely want Grant to comment also, but what I'm seeing, it's changed our business over the last year in so many ways. These announcements that you've seen recently, we talked about Airbnb and Microsoft, but also Adecco moving their US headquarters from Jacksonville to Atlanta. What was unusual about all three of those announcements, they did them on their own. None of them would comment on how many jobs they're creating. None of them really commented on real estate. In fact, Airbnb announced maybe 2 weeks ago, and then 2 days ago, they announced we've selected Dallas Smith as our real estate broker, and now we're going to start to look at office space. It's kind of really changed the process of site selection. And it's all because of COVID and remote working. And I believe the answer is because companies don't know. This is so unusual and unique. There's no handbook to refer to, like, how do we handle this? Everybody's waiting to see what's going to happen. When is it going to be safe to come back to the office? Will employees want to come back? I've seen documented articles by Goldman Sachs where the CEO of Goldman Sachs says, absolutely, employees are going to come back to the office. But then you see big tech companies on the other end of the pendulum saying they're never going to have to come back to the office. And so the answer is, I think they don't know, but the impact is I think it's caused office tenants to really delay or slow down their location decisions. Grant, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's all over the board. I don't, and it depends on who you talk to, right? If you're talking to, the brokerage community, the office, it's always sunny salespeople, everybody's coming back to the office. But then you actually talk to some of the tenants in their very building, they're like, no, we're not coming back. But I think, and Microsoft is another great example because they're onboarding staff with an expectation of you could be attached to here, but not even have to live here necessarily. And that's, that's a big paradigm shift for us. I think though, as we see the return to more office, in-office, environments, people, there's really kind of two types of employees during COVID, those that were able to transition, that had maybe space in their home for a home office. Maybe they didn't have, kids at home because they, were out of school. And then you have others, like me that live in a tiny house. And my God, the last thing I wanted was my kids home all day, every day, as much as I love them. And, my spouse and I on top of each other, and we're like, oh my God, get us back to the office as fast as we can. And, Greg and I are sitting in our socially distanced offices. I can hear them talking through the wall. We're neighbors. And I couldn't wait to jump at the opportunity to get back. But there's a measured return, and there's I think there's a desire for people. We're still human by nature, and people want to congregate. People want to be around all these awesome activity centers. The Beltline and what's happening around Trilith. What's happening in Alpharetta. In every corner of the region, cities are building out these really cool centers and, promoting arts and culture and walkability. And, we didn't see that, as much in the suburbs, 10 years ago as we do today. And so I think there's still this desire to be in a fun environment where you can be around people. Now that may be, instead of 100 people in a bullpen, that might be 20 people a little bit more distance out, but there's still that desire to come back. So I think, from a recruiting standpoint, on one side, it's almost made it easier for us because we have not had those real estate constraints like we have had in years past. You only have so much, inventory on the market, and the banks or investors are only going to lend so much money for spec buildings. So again, it's that chicken or the egg. How are you going to land, a 10,000 person, company if you don't have space ready to go for 10,000 people? Are they going to be able to find the real estate? And by the time they do, has it been announced enough that the prices have gone up and everybody in the neighborhoods are freaking out that, oh my gosh, this behemoth is in town, it's going to change everything? Until you find a company like Microsoft that said, no, we're coming in community first. This is going to be the antithesis of any other major, corporate move. We want to understand what the residents need. We want to be a partner. We want to know how we can get engaged. And we're here because, like Greg said, we are going to leverage a diverse talent pool. And that is our number one, I hate to call it an asset because it sounds like we're using it. It is our number one calling card right now, that as we're talking, not just nationally, but globally about, equity and equitable development for an entire community, to have not only talent that is ready to go today, but youth that are hungry to be that next, pool of talent, and that will have mentors and will have role models that are going to get those jobs, next week, so they can see, there's a path to an amazing career. And the diversity of careers, I think, to me, is what excites us in a company, like an Airbnb or like a Microsoft. This isn't just sitting behind a computer coding, right? We're talking, this is Xbox, right? This is content delivery. a company like Microsoft. I mean, they've got such a broad reach, and what we think of as a traditional tech company has so much more, in depth, more depth to it today than it ever has. There's marketing and SEO, there's all these different aspects. And so when we can pull on our university system and the technical college system, and our K-12 system, right? Getting kids ready to go right out of high school to take these careers. All of those, I think, bode incredibly well. And safeguarding programs, and Greg, correct me if I misspeak here, but I would add that one of our greatest economic development tools, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is the Hope Scholarship Program. Not just from growing jobs here intrinsically, but recruiting companies, and having the ability to we were talking yesterday about this. When a company relocates, sometimes it's offered, if the project is right, it's offered for relocating families if they have children, or if they're interested in going into the system. If they can get into a school, they can waive that 1-year residency requirement. That's a big deal if you're moving from a community and now you're thinking about having to pay for out-of-state tuition until you're considered in state. All those things are tools in the toolbox that we can use and are incredibly important.
Well, speaking of tools in the toolbox, I know that y'all kind of hit on incentives a little bit, but I was wondering if y'all could kind of say, what role does incentives play? And if there are ones that y'all are utilizing more frequently now than maybe you have previously. I know y'all talked about the growth of life sciences industries, and don't know if, certain credits are being more helpful, but kind of share a little bit more along those lines.
Sure. And for so many reasons, this is a very unusual time in economic development. Incentives have been available pretty much in every state and every community in the country for decades. There are things that are sort of standard and expected, like a partial property tax abatement on your real and personal property. Some states have exemptions on sales tax for construction supplies and materials. Cash is always king. There are grants available that are discretionary, that are available from some local communities and from the state. And, that's a favorite of companies. If we're going to put 500 employees in this community that pay these wages, and we're going to invest this amount of money, what kind of grant can we get to offset our costs? And by the way, that grant in some states could be used for training programs, could be used for employee relocation, could be used to offset the cost of buying or leasing real estate. Of course, we have Quick Start here that that's a free program. It's a discretionary, but so we don't need to give a grant for training. But at the same time, I would say that, to me, in my mind, Quick Start is set up and works really well for industrial companies, for distribution, for manufacturing, maybe for some call centers. When we're working with Microsoft's or corporate headquarters or a software development operation, I would argue that Quick Start is not really relevant and is not really seen as an incentive to companies creating those types of jobs. But why I say that incentives right now, it's a very strange time, is now more than ever, they've become controversial. And there's this notion of, should taxpayers be giving money to very wealthy companies at a time when funds are needed for other things? We talked about public transit. As a community, would it be better to spend that money expanding public transit, or is it better to take that money and give it to a big company that is as an incentive to come to Atlanta? I would say that that's a false argument, and it's not an either or. I would say we could do both. And it's a very complicated discussion, but just know that it's a very controversial topic in many communities right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Grant.
Sorry, Daniel, I was just going to say, they are, they can be incredibly controversial. They can also be a powerful tool. And if you have momentum around an industry like the film industry, and I'll talk, creative industry right here for a second. You've seen what that can do place make and to frankly bring investment that we would not have gotten, potentially otherwise. What that does though is it can create an ecosystem that is dependent upon a particular credit staying around. And ideally, incentive should be, well, let's build up let's use it to grow an ecosystem. Let's use it to grow the capacities. And then at some point, it might sunset. And, once you become that kind of mecca for whatever you're trying to incent, as opposed to maybe, a neighborhood incentive that's around, a community development district, or maybe it's a TAD or some type of tax credits that are more related to geography and jobs. If it's a particular business sector incentive, at some point the theory would be that it either diminish or sunset once it's been effective to grow. The film tax credit is a very sticky one because there's a 50% tax credit in a few states in the country, and there's no filming there because nobody wants to film there. It's incredibly difficult or expensive. So tax credits aren't everything, but they certainly were helpful for us. But now we're looking at the 360 around content and the creative industries in general. So we passed legislation around tour origination. So for major touring concerts and events, if you create those sets, if you do all the training here, and you launch a nationwide or global tour of whatever it is, it could be a theatrical production, it could be a concert. There's a tax credit for that, right? There's music, tax credits. There are post-production tax credits. So as we game development tax credits, as we look at broadening the support for specific industries like that, it becomes, more and more important, but as our, friends from the Fed know, and in the fintech industry, we don't have a specific fintech tax credit, right? We have a very friendly business community, and we have a history of growing and being a resource for payments processing companies because of the Federal Reserve, because of the early days of processing checks and really being kind of the center for that. But that attracted the ink companies, that attracted the paper companies that actually printed the checks, that attracted accounting companies that eventually created software. And so you created this entire ecosystem around it, but without a real tax incentive. So I think you've got to balance, it's a very careful balance between politically and publicly what's, what there's an appetite for, and physically at what point, to Gregg's point, is it kind of corporate welfare? And that's a discussion we have every single day, every state, every country. We're all having these same discussions. And it's global competition. It's not just Texas and Tennessee, that South Carolina we're competing with. It's Canada, it's Mexico, it's the UK, it's Brazil, it's Asia, it's everywhere.
Absolutely. And I think that we continue to hear this legislative session about how taxes are kind of being factored into the broader discussion. But thinking about political decisions and what y'all see, how have, things like voting, anti-gay and anti-transgender policies play a role in the site selectors and the expansions that y'all work with?
Yeah, I would say that public policy has a significant impact on corporate decisions where to locate. And, I'll go back to 14 years ago. I moved to Atlanta from Boston, and I was working in economic development in Boston. And for those of you who don't know, the life sciences industry, I would argue there's no better place to be on the planet than Boston. If you're a biotech company, pharmaceutical, medical device, that is the place to be. They have every asset you could possibly imagine. I moved here 14 years ago, and at that time, Georgia had a big initiative around life sciences. And the main trade show for the industry is called the Bio Show. And Georgia literally spent millions of dollars sponsoring the Bio Show to bring it to Atlanta. And it came here, must have been about 12 years ago or so. And while that conference was in Atlanta, the legislature passed a bill banning stem cell research in Georgia. And I would argue that those millions of dollars that Georgia spent was thrown away because of that public policy. And it set us back over a decade on our efforts to recruit life sciences companies. And if, people will say, well, we have CDC here, and we have Emory Medical School and Morehouse School of Medicine and Georgia Tech and all these great life sciences assets, but why don't we have more life sciences companies? I would point back to that legislation, because Georgia basically told the CEO of every life sciences company, we don't want you here, when they passed that legislation. Now, fast forward today, I can give a lot of examples, and I know we're bumping up against time, but when Amazon, the HQ2 project, was looking here, we were part of that. And one of their questions was, Georgia punished Delta for Delta's position on guns. If we come to Georgia, are you going to punish us for something? And that, made it a real uphill battle for us to recruit that investment. When GE was looking to move their headquarters out of Fairfield, Connecticut, they shortlisted it to 3 cities, to Boston, New York, and Atlanta. And during their visit to Atlanta, our legislature passed the Religious Freedom Bill. And in 26 years of being in economic development, I've never had a project cancel mid-visit. We were kind of like a day and a half into the visit. We had all kinds of meetings set up for the GE executives, and they pulled us aside and they said, Jeff Immelt's office called, and he said, we don't do business in a state that discriminates against people. We're ending this visit and we're leaving. So that, I can tell you, had a direct impact on where GE put their headquarters. And I could probably list off 10 more examples of name your policy, and I can tell you how it impacted a corporate decision, but that plays a huge role. It has tremendous consequences.
Well, you can amplify that when you talk about the creative community, because there is no greater, group of companies than the creative sector who value diversity and individuality and freedom of expression. And it can, it's just part of being in the South. And, I moved here about the same time that Gregg did, lived all over the world, and grew up on the West Coast. And that's something I think we still struggle with as a region. We've got 2 Georgias, and I think there's a lot to be said for how a community can come together and show support in a number of ways, right? And because Georgia is this, this mecca for Fortune 500s, and there's a value in a diversity of opinion, of course, right? Not just what we personally think. And I think that's what makes America great, is being able to sometimes completely disagree with your neighbor, but it's a value to be able to do that, and to do that openly. It's really tough when that goes into public policy, though. My biggest aha moment was when Clayton County Schools lost accreditation. Was pulled by Sachs. It was actually one of my first days on a new job, and we had a CEO of a major Japanese company that was in town on a visit the morning that the story broke, and he came to this is going to be one of the biggest expansions that we had ever seen, and he came into my office and he plopped down a copy of, actually must have been the day after, he plopped down a copy of, it was either the Tokyo Times, just an English language Japanese newsletter, and it had on page 12C, whatever, it had the story of U.S. school system losing accreditation. And he said, this is where I am right now. And I said, it is, but let me explain, we've got amazing teachers, amazing students. This is, and he said, we're finished. Expansion's off, goodbye, and left. And I think those are, there's ramifications for years and years after that. Gregg mentioned, bathroom bill and others, and Tim and all of our team, all the folks, Amy, everybody who's on our public policy team that's here on the call with us today, they live it every day. And the balance is finding a way for everybody's voice to be heard. And that's hard sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think too, thinking about our K-12 education, that part is so important. We think about, families that move here and how they can kind of continue to live and grow and thrive. So I think a lot to consider. I think we want to try to get to two more questions. I'll first start about, were there any small projects that y'all worked on recently that have been really interesting? Again, maybe kind of open the door, but haven't hit the news cycle quite yet.
Well, I'll jump in, and Grant will have a more current example, but I think it's worth mentioning this, that, it's not just the huge blockbuster deals, Mercedes moving their headquarters or the Honeywell 800-person software center. About 8 years ago, we worked with AT&T, and it was like a 10-person project, 5,000 square feet. I personally spent about a year and a half working on this deal, and I would say I worked just as hard on that as I did on Microsoft or Mercedes headquarters. Ralph De La Vega was the CEO of AT&T Mobility, and we took him over to Georgia Tech. And he spent a day there learning about all the assets and resources of Georgia Tech. And AT&T has these innovation centers that they call foundries, where any company that wants to sort of test out their technology on the AT&T network can do it at that facility. They had one in Tel Aviv, one in Palo Alto, and one in Dallas. They ended up locating one at Tech Square in Midtown. And AT&T was so adamant that it be at Tech Square at street level that they bought out the lease of an existing tenant to go. They were very intentional about going into that spot. And I would say just by having this very modest, small facility, that attracted other technology companies to come to Atlanta to be in close proximity to that AT&T foundry. But Grant probably has a more current example.
Well, we can't break, confidentiality on projects that haven't announced yet, but I think there are so many more, 10, 20, 50, job, expansions. And sometimes it's not even a number of jobs, right? It could be a company just, during COVID, moving from an overpriced, 20,000 square foot lease that they had to right sizing to, 8,000 square feet in a much cooler space, closer to where their employees want to be. And what that's done for them emotionally and financially, they're going to be successful for another decade just by moving. So I think there's, we've seen some of that. One project I'm so passionate about and so excited, for Southwest Atlanta, as we look at all of the the big announcements, major investments, at our HBCUs by global companies. We've got smaller projects. Jay Jackson runs a group that just bought an old elementary school in Southwest Atlanta. It's called Rise Creative, RYSE. And he and his partners are taking this 40,000 square foot school that's been vacant for decades, and it's just an incredible eyesore and a source for crime and dumping. And they are turning it into this creative collective where they're, as opposed to some big shiny new development where they're trying to attract creatives, we want potters and we want all that, but it's going to be $40 a square foot, and you're not going to find a creative move into a potter moving into Pont City market prices. So this is authentic to the community. These are going to be incredibly affordable spaces. Access to the local school system, and trying to really promote gaming and animation and VR jobs and podcast studios. It's such a cool project. So you'll see a lot more about it, but there's every corner of the region has these awesome little communities that are popping up. And the more that we can do to support, our local artists, our local craftspeople, our restaurants, particularly the performing arts community has been devastated, by closures during COVID. I think it's incumbent upon all of us, because if we moved here, we moved here for more than just a job. We moved here for a vibe, and every part of the region has that. So I'm so excited for what's next, for all of the region.
Absolutely. And I think we've all learned how much we treasure those small businesses and quirky things that really make our community strong and a lot of fun to live in. I think we have time for one more question real quick. I know Kevin Shea asked, what are the most important workforce questions for large tech office projects? What are they most concerned about, and kind of what data would you provide to them to show them that Metro Atlanta is a great place to locate?
I'll jump in and give a quick answer and turn it over to Grant. And my apologies in advance. I have a 10 o'clock meeting that I'm going to have to jump onto. But the questions that I get from the site consultants for large office projects and fintech projects in particular, they want hard data on university programs that are relevant to the fintech industry and how many students are enrolled in those programs, how many students graduate from those programs each year. Where are those universities located? How can they structure internship programs? Are there student competitions that they can sponsor and get involved with? So they want that data on the university pipeline. They want, and there are proprietary databases like Esri and Jobs EQ that our organizations subscribe to, where you can find out for particular job classifications, how many people are employed in those, what are the average wages? We provide that. But most importantly than all that hard data are employer interviews. And in the case of Deluxe, thanks to Grant and FinTech Atlanta, we literally set up probably 15 or 16 employer interviews for them to talk to and get a testimonial. And with that, my apologies, I'm going to have to sign off, but I'll turn it over to Grant.
Thanks, Greg. So, and I would argue that we've got the best research department on the planet. I know Maddie Shields is on the call as well. Maddie's team works with, Georgia Department of Economic Development, Invest Atlanta, with Georgia Power. There's a lot of powerful research that happens in the region, and the speed at which the community can come together and find answers, or that tracking things that are important for us to know. It's really, it's critical to be able to not have to go searching for something, right? If we've got the stockpile of data, we've got reports, we have things that are tracked regularly, and to be able to respond in a super timely manner, because, again, you're not the only community companies are looking at, but then also to really think about trends. And that's one of the things, that our research team has been engaged in for a long time, is really looking at what's next, not just what's happening now and how do we find that data, but working with the economic development partners in the region is, we may have these 6 or 7 clusters that we're really, objectively strong in now, but we want to get to these 2 or 3 or 4 sexy new things, right? How do we pull all those pieces together? How do we get the university system and the K-12 system thinking about, gaming and animation, just as an example? How do we find investors? How do we find, facilities? How do we find, corporate leaders, conferences, all those things that are really needed, to grow. So, the range of questions is never ending. It's never a typical RFP that you have to respond to. So again, thanks to so many people that are on this call. We depend on you and your knowledge, to draw, and those employer interviews are absolutely, they're critical for us. We've got a staple of great, C-suites and CHROs, people that we can call and say, would you spend 30 minutes with this company? Because they don't want to hear from us. We're the happy, smiley, shiny, salespeople in some cases. They want to hear what it's like to actually, do it for themselves. And we don't want to be in that conversation. We want them to have an open and honest conversation.
Absolutely. I think, having our strong business community and everyone really able to support the state helps us to continue to grow, thrive, create jobs, and prosperity. So Karen, I'll turn it over to you for closing remarks, but just a big thank you to Greg and Grant. I think everyone has really enjoyed the session, and certainly would provide some resources to y'all's website too to get additional insights. But thank you, Grant, and thank you, Greg, and over to you, Karen.
Grant, thank you so much. And please share our thanks to Greg too, because that was a really interesting conversation. I learned a lot. There's an opportunity still to become a member of MAX. And there's a lot of reasons to join, both from people who've been in the development and economic work today, and about what's our long-term strategies. And then for people who are new, this is a great opportunity to dive in And then come back and join us again on March 19th. We're going to have another Max Minutes where we're going to talk about 2-generation innovation and solutions. We already heard Grant talk a little bit of today about what it's like to be someone who is working and has kids and is trying to juggle both. And so what are these 2-generation innovations that we can learn more about? So join us then. And then just to close, a thanks once more to our anchors and the important work that they do to make Max possible. So with that, everyone have a great Friday and a great weekend. And it was a real pleasure to be with you today.
Thanks, Grant.